honored to be here today with Doug Laney of West Monroe. He's an innovation fellow at West Monroe. Doug Laney is a noted personality in the data and analytics space. He's the author of Infonomics, which I believe is the kind of the seminal must-have, must-know piece related to treating data as a real asset. We give a lot of lip service to that in the data and analytics world. Doug is also the author of a new book called Data Juice. We're going to talk about both of those books today. Like myself, Doug is also a former Gartner analyst. We may get into a little bit of a discussion of our shared experiences at Gartner. But his list of accomplishments is long. Also a professor at his alma mater, University of Illinois, Champaign. Look really forward to diving into these topics with Doug today. As far as I'm concerned, in my individual opinion, if you are a CDO and you haven't read Infonomics by Doug Laney, you need to put it on your must-read list. As a matter of fact, the Wall Street Journal has recommended that it's on your must-read list if you're a CIO at the very least for this summer. So welcome, Doug.
Thanks, Malcolm. Great to be with you. Personality, huh? I guess I need some paparazzi now or something.
Well, yeah, armed guards and everything else. But yeah, I mean, you are extremely well known in this space, and rightfully so. I can recall vividly being at a Gartner Data and Analytics Summits in 2017, 18, where you were speaking, and I had a lot of aha moments listening to you speak. I think a lot of your research at Gartner led to the publication of Infonomics. And it really, your perspectives really helped change the way I look at data. It was foundational to me. It really helped me understand why data is as important as it is, and taking things beyond just lip service and actual into implementation and business value and business outcomes. So Doug, can you take just a few minutes and describe the framework that you outlined in Infonomics and why a CDO should be reading Infonomics?
Yeah, well, first, I appreciate the kind words. I really do appreciate it. Thanks. Yeah, Infonomics was definitely written for CDOs. In fact, I learned a great trick while I was at Gartner. One of our colleagues had written a research publication on how to use personas and apply personas to what you're doing. And I took that approach, and what I did was I created a number of personas who were kind of an amalgam of various people that I know, mostly chief data officers or senior data and analytics leaders. And I created these personas, and I printed a photo of an individual and their background and interests and what moves them and so forth. And I put these on my wall while I wrote the book, because I think a lot of mistakes book authors make is they write for themselves, or they write for I don't know who, their English high school teacher, I don't know, who I actually sent a copy of my book to. She was very appreciative. Yeah, I found her. She had long retired, but I found her and sent her a copy of the book, and with a nice note, because she had really inspired me to raise my game when it came to writing. But anyway, so I have these personas, various CDOs, aspirational CDOs, established CDOs, and so they were the ones I was writing to when I wrote the book as well. I did also intend for the book to be used as a textbook in MBA classes, and certainly the Infonomics class that I teach at Illinois. They had asked me to teach a class while I was at Gartner. And I said, well, listen, I want to write this book first, and then we'll use the book as a textbook if you like. So I actually created a teaching guide or instructor guide alongside the book, so that I could develop a curriculum for it. But yeah, it's definitely for CDOs. Listen, chief data officers, the role is still kind of being defined, but we do know that it's really about how to manage and leverage data as an actual asset. Is really kind of at the core of what chief data officers need to be doing to drive improved value from data. But one of the things that I found was that most organizations don't measure their data in any way. Maybe they measure some data quality characteristics, but they don't measure it as if it were an asset. So a lot of organizations will talk about data as an asset, but not really treat it like one. And again, I think there's the old adage that you can't manage what you don't measure, and I think there's a problem there, that if we're not measuring the value of data, its cost component, its the benefits that it's delivering, the probable future economic benefits of a data asset, its market value, even if we're thinking about externalizing it, then we're really in a really poor position to justify and get the budgets and resources that we need to manage data as an actual asset. And then I think it follows that if, for any asset that you're not managing particularly well, whether it's your physical assets or financial assets or human capital, you're not going to be able to deliver value or optimize the value that you're delivering from those assets. So that's kind of how the whole kind of the 3 M's of Infonomics, the measuring, managing, and monetizing data kind of all fit together. And so for most organizations, it's kind of a vicious cycle of not measuring and therefore not managing and therefore not monetizing their data as optimally as they could. And so the idea behind Infonomics is kind of, as we Cub fans, used to say in Chicago before we won the World Series, is to reverse the curse. Right? There's the old curse of the Billy Goat here in Chicago for the Cubs team, and so reverse the curse or flip the script. And so to get companies to start measuring the value of their data first, its cost components, its market value, its impact on revenue, its quality characteristics, its business relevance, things like that will drive behaviors in the organization, not only for managing data better, but to kind of light a fire under the business to do more with their data.
So what would you say to a CDO who said, well, okay, monetize, manage, measure. The managing part, we seem to be reasonably good at. We've invested in a lot of tools,
Sort of.
reasonably good at, right?
Yeah.
We have some integration software, some NDM software, some data quality software. We spend a lot of money on that.
Yeah, I have some thoughts on that.
What's that?
I have some thoughts on that, but we'll get there.
Yeah.
Finish your
Would
thought,
love to
please.
hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah.
I think the state of data management is, if I were to give it a 5 out of 10 based on my 3 years at Gartner, or a rating out of 10, I'd probably give it a 5, maybe a solid 6.
Sure.
We can certainly talk about that. There's a lot more work to be done there.
Yeah.
But getting back to the notion of measuring, what I would hear all the time from CDOs and CIOs that I was talking to is, well, that sounds nice, Malcolm, but that's really impossible, because the impacts here from a data perspective are indirect, right? If I improve my quality of my customer data, there's no direct tie to retention or incremental sales.
Yep.
What would you say to that person, Doug?
I would say that's naive. Yes, it's difficult, but it's not impossible. And if we follow the same ways that valuation experts value other kinds of assets, we can apply those same kinds of techniques with some nuances to data. A chief data officer at AIG told me, and I wrote about this in the book, told me how he was able to use the valuation models that I published in the book to connect the dots between data quality and business process performance. So yeah, there are a lot of things that go into the performance of any business process, resulting in some ROI number, but they're able to show how improvement in data accuracy or an improvement in data completeness actually drives improvements in business process performance. And we developed an entire metrics framework for a very large, I can't name the name, but the very large retail company that they can use to empirically track how improvements in various quality metrics and data governance indicators drive improvements in business process performance, leading to revenue improvements, profit improvements, market share, risk reduction, et cetera.
Yeah, one of my favorite models at Gartner, which I know was there when you were there, is the value pyramid, right? Starting at the top of the pyramid and working your way down into individual fields of data. But still, there's this mysterious and for many a challenging jump between the quality metric. In this case, could be quality. It doesn't have to be quality, but the quality metric and the actual business outcome. And one of the ones that I was favorite of that I like to use, the example I like to use is around like cross-sell or upsell, because everybody has metrics around qualified leads, right? And if I delivered you one more qualified lead, what would that equal to from a sales perspective? That one was often one that worked really well with me.
Yeah.
When you're talking about the state of data management, and you said you have some opinions, what are those opinions? I'd love to hear more. I think the state of management is okay, but could be a lot better. What do you think?
It could be a lot better. I just think we data professionals, and I'm as much to blame as anyone, over my 30 plus year career, we've done just a crap job of applying asset management principles and practices to data. So asset management practices have been around for centuries, right? And we just have not really applied them to data. We haven't talked about things like data condition, supply chains, pick any asset management kind of approach, and we just have not done a good job of applying the principles and practices. So one of the things I did, and I wrote about in Infonomics, is I looked at a variety of different kinds of asset management practices, like material asset management, financial asset management, human capital management, IP asset management, library science, records management, and there's just a lot that we can should be borrowing from those disciplines that we're just not. And so one of the things that I did was aggregate those into a set of what I call generally accepted information principles. On how to manage data, kind of 18 principles on how to manage data by applying best practices in asset management. So I think maybe that's more strategic, but when it comes to technology, the technology is always improving for integrating data, for handling master data management, metadata management, data cleansing, data quality. One of the things that we're not doing very well, though, is dealing with the increase in the variety of data. So I talk about the 3 M's of Infonomics. I'm also I don't know if you know, the guy who came up with the 3 V's of big data. So the volume, velocity, and variety. And so, yes, we've been able to scale infrastructure and architecture and technology to handle increasing volume and velocity of data, but not so much variety. We haven't really figured out a way to automate kind of the integration of disparate data sources to align them semantically and integrate them physically or in real time very, very well. I mean, yes, there are data integration products out there, but to make them work, it's still very much a manual effort of mapping data elements and trying to rationalize the differences in their semantics. So I think there's a big opportunity for some vendor out there, to figure out how to really automate the integration of data much better, of disparate data sources.
I think there's a lot of promise out there
Mm-hmm.
around the notion of, I will loosely say, a data fabric, where you could use metadata to help inform or augment or even potentially automate integration patterns, that where you could use things like feedback from whether a transaction was successful or not successful as a means to understand, should there be an integration pattern where there isn't one today. An example would be between a piece of RevRec software potentially and a data management software. I think that's kind of where you're going.
Yeah. I mean, not just the software, but the data itself.
Right.
So, you've got a lot of customer data around the organization. Any company I go into has 12 different definitions of what a customer is from different databases and applications. I just talked to a client yesterday. They said we have multiple instances of Salesforce, and each one defines a customer differently, right? And so how do we integrate that data into getting a complete picture of a customer? And so that's very much a still manual architecture, coding, modeling, and coding kind of effort to do that.
Yeah. Well, that what you describe as a classic MDM problem, but I think what we're seeing now is that context matters. Context always mattered, but I think it's going to matter more because it will help whittle down the volume of data if you understand the context, meaning customer in the context of a marketing interaction versus a compliance or a legal interaction.
Right.
So I think when you couple all those things together, plus the kind of the semantic consistency that you were talking about, I think we're onto something. But getting back to the notion of kind of asset valuation practices, what are kind of tangible actions that a CDO could take after watching this video? Would that be like sitting down with the CFO to understand how to build some of these models, or what are one or two things to try to take more of the kind of the asset valuation approach here?
Absolutely, we're doing that with a manufacturer right now, and we just at West Monroe did it with a couple pharmaceutical companies to help them value their data for different purposes.
Yep.
And then depending on why you want to value the data, whether you're trying to get investments, whether you're trying to prove or justify the benefits of an analytic use case, or just value the enterprise data, perhaps for an M&A type transaction. There are a variety of reasons why you would want to value data, and then therefore different methods. Kind of the standard methods of valuing any asset are the cost approach, the market approach, and the income approach. The cost approach, what did that asset cost to generate or create or purchase? The market approach is what is the value of that asset on an open, arm's length marketplace. There's some nuances with data, again, that when we sell data, we're actually licensing it. Usually we're not transferring ownership of it. So, and because data is a non-rivalrous, non-depleting asset, we can license it over and over again. And so the market value method requires a bit of price optimization. And then the income approach is what is this asset's contribution to income streams? And increasingly, we're helping clients not only look at current income streams, but if we remember, accountants will value an asset based on its probable future economic benefits. So those probable future economic benefits for an asset may include use cases which we're conceiving of or are in planning or some stage of implementation. So we want to kind of look at what are the revenue streams or value streams that are going to be generated by those, the cash flows and so forth over a time horizon. So yeah, it can be pretty sophisticated, but this is all kind of standard stuff that accountants have been doing for years. So yes, Malcolm, just as you said, we should be engaging the CFOs or the financial organization, which is exactly what we've done pretty much in every valuation initiative that we've worked on at West Monroe for clients. We've involved someone from the client's financial team, at least to kind of bless the methods that we're using.
Right. Right. So I love this notion of generally accepted information principles. When I hear G, A, and then P, I usually think of GAAP, accounting principles.
Right. So I borrowed from that. Right.
Yeah, it's a riff. Yeah, I get it. And for a long time, I think I was kind of doing one of these kind of fist shaking at the accountants of the world and the kind of the GAAP principles, because I've always thought that data should be considered a balance sheet item. But one of the things that I found interesting in Infonomics was that you actually say that it may be a good thing that data is not considered a balance sheet asset. Tell us more about why potentially could be a good thing.
I don't have a horse in the race, so I really don't care whether data is a balance sheet asset or not. I think it would help some organizations and it would hurt others. The negative aspect of reporting on the value of your data is, well, like imagine you're a CFO or a CEO. Now, raise your hand if you want to report on more publicly than you already do, right? Probably not, right? There's certain things that you like to keep proprietary and out of the prying eyes of investors and competitors. So what data you have and how you're deploying it and how you're valuing it is a closely held secret for many organizations, particularly digital organizations and those that are relying heavily on data or data derivatives to drive business value. So yeah, that's one reason. The other the flip side is companies that could report, if you could report on the value of your data, it might augment the valuation of your company, because data and digital service companies get valued very differently than traditional companies with traditional physical or financial products or services. And so if you could value your data as part of that business, then your overall valuation might get a pretty good bump. In fact, we're working with some companies to take the data part of their business, the data in their business, excuse me, and move it into a separate entity, a separate corporate entity. And then that entity gets valued at some premium because it's a data-based part of the business. And then the parent company can include the value of that subsidiary on their balance sheet and get a bump from that. So it's something we're working on. It's called assetizing the data, because data is not a balance sheet asset according to accounting standards in most cases. But what you can do is move the data part of your business into another company and then value that and then include that on your balance sheet. So it's a bit of accounting shenanigans, but it's entirely legit.
Well, I find that fascinating, right? Yeah. Because on day one, if I'm a CDO, how can I make a massive impact here? Maybe that massive impact is talking about, do we need a separate business here that more aligns to
Mhm.
a data-driven valuation than a traditional valuation. I think
Right.
the
Yeah.
classic example that we heard in the news recently was the whole American Airlines thing and getting a loan
Hmm.
or at least a line of credit, I believe,
Right.
against
Yep.
their loyalty database that put their valuation
Hmm.
of 2 or 3x their airline.
Yeah, I published an article about that in Forbes a couple summers ago. Yeah, so the airlines, in order to stay aloft, pun intended, at the beginning of the
Right.
pandemic, needed to take out loans, and so the loans they got against their customer loyalty programs, basically comprised of just data, right? Were a 2 to 3x multiple, both United and American, and so now there are some airlines that have and are looking into lopping off part of the data
Right.
business, their loyalty programs, into separate corporate entities to get that premium valuation.
Oh,
So,
fantastic.
yeah.
So the last M here, monetization, we've been kind of flirting with
Mm,
this. And one of the posts that you had on LinkedIn recently that I found really thought provoking, I'm not
mm.
sure you intended it that way, but it was to me, was that one of your clients was laying on a beach in Puerto Rico reading Infonomics, and you had made a point about how that client was working to, I'm going to put words in your mouth probably here, collateralize. That's what the word I will use, collateralize or
Right.
potentially leverage their data. But you flirted at the idea of potentially alternative uh, value drivers here. Uh, I kind of went to the crypto space when I heard
Okay.
Puerto Rico. I don't know why, I just put two and two together. It's like,
Okay.
oh, Puerto Rico, crypto, alternative data. But
Mm.
I'd love your thought on the whole crypto world and the notion potentially of tokenizing data or using digital assets as a way to kind of work around, for lack of a better word, kind of traditional ways of leveraging data or fiat backed debt. What do you have any
Yeah, I
thoughts
mean,
there?
at the core, crypto assets are data, right?
Yeah.
But then we can also use the underlying technology, the blockchain technology, to track and certify the provenance and lineage of data assets. So I think that technology will have some initial impact in the data management space in terms of metadata management, in terms of data licensing as well. So data brokers and so forth will be able to track who has their data and how it's being used and so forth. Because right now, data brokers, they'll publish a data set to you and they have no idea what you're doing with it. You could be
Right.
repackaging it, reselling it for all they know. Unless it's customer data and they insert seeds in it, which are fake names and addresses that will
Other
basically
watermarks.
phone,
Yeah.
yeah, they'll basically phone home if the data set's being used improperly. I mean, that's been done in mailing lists for decades, but there really are no um, digital ways to do this with other kinds of data assets, and so blockchain might be a way to handle that.
Now, uh, tying off on Infonomics, one of the things that I liked the most about the book is that you have a healthy smattering of real world use cases, right? That I assume that through years at Gartner and other interactions with
Mhm.
companies, you were actually able to say, okay, CDO at company X was able to do Y using Z practices. I love that. It's throughout the book. Is that really kind of the genesis for Data Juice? And maybe just
It
tell us a
is. It
little bit
is.
about Data Juice and why it should be on my
Sure
reading list.
will. Yeah, my editor at Gartner um, uh, advised that I include a lot of stories to make my cases, and so I researched these stories, and then also when I first returned to Gartner, so I returned to Gartner a decade or more ago um, for my second time. They said, listen, you're the big data guy, research big data and write about it and advise clients on big data. Well, the questions quickly turned from what is big data to how do we do big data to what do we do with all this big data. And I was like, I can give you some generic answers, but let me go collect some stories. So a dozen stories turned into 50 stories, turned into nearly 500 stories. I've now got about 700 stories that I've compiled over the years. And so yes, I included a bunch of stories, maybe 40 or 50 in data in Infonomics to kind of make the points. But people were asking for more. Like, we want to be inspired. Tell us stories in the manufacturing industry or where companies are doing predictive analytics, and we just need stories in order to kind of light a fire under our board of directors or our business people. And so finally, I compiled them all into the new book that was just published earlier this month called Data Juice. It's 101 stories about how organizations can squeeze value from their actually 101 stories of how organizations are actually squeezing value from their data. And then each story includes, most stories have a, why were they doing this, and kind of what was involved, and then an actual outcome. So you talked about outcomes earlier, Malcolm. So outcomes are, very important. And I guess there are a lot of vendors out there who tell stories like, by using our technology, we increased the number of users by 200x, or the speed of queries was 1,000% faster. Like, well, that's, interesting, but how did that actually deliver business benefits? And so these stories are all business benefits oriented. Most of them are financial benefits. Some are social benefits or others. But they're pretty much all measurable benefits. And some of them are just purely, really innovative and inspirational ways to use data. But then each story, I started kind of writing an analysis of each story. Like, what did I see? What did jump out at me? What would I recommend for this company or organization to do going forward to take this idea further? And all my recommendations started to sound kind of homogeneous. So I reached out to nearly 100 friends in the industry and said, listen, I want you to write an analysis. So I kind of crowdsourced the entire book, which is good because my wife told me if I ever wrote another book, it would have to be titled "How I Used Big Data to Find My Next Wife." So I was like, honey, how about if I crowdsource this book and like compile these stories and then have other people kind of write the analyses. And so I got the green light for that. But yeah, the book's been really well received. Thank you. And great accolades from business leaders and data leaders and technology leaders and executives, around the world. So yeah, I'd say it's meant to be, and it's not, Infonomics is more of a kind of a how-to book and right. Providing really some best practices and ways to apply asset management and measurement practices to data, and more of a book that you might sit down and read. I think Data Juice, although people tell me they love flipping from one story to the next, it's really meant to be more of a reference book. So each story is tagged by the type of industry, the type of data, the type of analytics that was used, geography, and so you can actually look at the index and thumb to whatever stories might be most meaningful. But at the end, the book is meant to be it's meant to inspire organizations to do more with their data, or maybe shame them into doing more with their data as well.
I get the shame angle. That can be a very, very powerful motivator.
It is powerful. Yeah.
When I was tasked to implement an MDM, one of the first things we did was build a report that showed how bad the data really was.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And that was heavily motivating. But all else being equal, of course,
sunlight being the best disinfectant, right?
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. All those being equal, of course, if you can find carrot and not so much stick, it's probably a little bit better. But before we tie up here, I would love to understand your perspective of the future, kind of where things are going, what you see some of to the degree that we are prognosticators at all and that we can see the future at all. I mean, I see a few kind of normal things evolving, but would love your perspective on, if I'm a CDO and I'm building a longer term roadmap, what are the things that I should be thinking about?
I think you've got to have your eye on blockchain. You've got to have your eye on quantum. I don't know if either of those, but maybe blockchain, but not quantum, requires some planning right now. But keep it in kind of the background of the strategy, I would say. Quantum is going to radically change analytic capabilities and privacy and security. So definitely have an eye on that. Organizationally, I'm starting to see more and more, as I've been recommending for years, the bifurcation of the IT organization into separate I and T organizations. I think the day when information and technology were tightly coupled, were decades ago, and there's no reason that data and technology need to be even discussed in the same breath anymore, let alone managed simultaneously. And so, unfortunately, as I wrote about and I've said, and others have said this as well, a lot of CIOs are really chief infrastructure officers and haven't really been focused on managing data as an actual asset. So maybe it makes sense to separate IT into separate I and T organizations. In some cases, where some clients have kind of taken my advice on that, they've even dispensed with the CIO role altogether. And they now have a chief technology officer and a chief data officer and are managing those assets separately. Of course, they're very interrelated, and of course, they're interrelated with other business assets. But from a management and strategy standpoint, they really can be largely managed separately. Yeah, so that's I think another trend. Again, I would love to see some kind of some vendor, some technology being able to automatically integrate data sources based on understanding their semantic consistencies and inconsistencies, and or automatically fill in gaps in data quality, correctness, completeness, et cetera, by using external data sources. I think external data sources are really the next horizon of company data. Most organizations really just spend a lot of time kind of staring at their own navel when it comes to analyzing the data that they have, and really don't have a very good awareness of the full range of external data sources available, from millions of data sets published by government organizations and NGOs worldwide, from thousands of companies selling data brokers and data aggregators and data marketplaces, to hundreds of partners that you can exchange data with in return, not necessarily for cash, but maybe for goods and services, and social media data, and billions of websites that can have content that can be harvested. So, I think unfortunately many organizations have a entire department dedicated to procuring office supplies, but no one dedicated to procuring data supplies.
Right.
Some research that I did recently kind of bore that out, and it's really quite unfortunate, and I think a big mistake. So I think the future will involve better integration of external data assets, and even from a data management standpoint, I'm expecting extended ecosystems to start to emerge, where trading partners will co-manage data, rather than having be my data and your data. We're managing data in a common environment in the cloud together, and we agree on rules of the road and governance and access, and share the costs of that. So I think we'll start to see that as well. I think the cloud certainly enables that. So those are just a few ideas. But
I love the last one.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I love it all. Having done multiple tours of duty at a third-party data provider down in Brad Street, obviously
Right.
I've kind of got that pounded into my DNA about the value of third-party data, external data. But all the things you touched on, couldn't agree more. The last one, really intriguing to me. This notion of kind of shared governance. I think you could loosely use the phrase a consortium there.
You could. Yeah, consortium has some negative connotations as well, just because they tend to not work very well. But yeah, I'm talking about a really shared management and data management environment. I call it an extended information ecosystem, or extended data ecosystem. So yeah, and I think there are companies maybe like Walmart that sort of do this for some of their suppliers.
Well,
and Amazon, right, handles data for a lot of product providers. But yeah.
It's to me the killer use case there is supply chain, right? Companies need more visibility on the supply chain, and that shared management approach, I think, is going to be key to that. I also happen to think that blockchain can play a role here, and this notion of DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, where those DAOs exist purely as governance entities to maintain the semantic consistency, to maintain the definitions, to maintain kind of the common area where data is shared across organizations. I think this is really interesting. Totally agree with you.
Good.
Well, listen, Doug, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to our listeners today. It's been a pleasure having you on CDO Matters. Look forward to continuing to interact with you. I just joined the Forbes Technology Council, so you'll be seeing me in more in Forbes. But really appreciate you coming on. I couldn't recommend more Infonomics, if you haven't already read it,
Thank you.
please, I couldn't recommend it more. And Data Juice, I'm excited to read. So,
Thank you.
Doug Laney, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks. Thank you, Malcolm. And to return the favor, for any of your CDO listeners, if they'd like to reach out to me for a free copy of Infonomics and or Data Juice, inscribed copies maybe for them or for their ELT, their executive leadership team,
Oh,
they
wow.
can reach out to me directly.
That's fantastic. I mean,
yeah.
it's $18 on Kindle, $24 hard copy. So there's some real value. That's wonderful.
Yeah,
Thank you so
happy to
much.
reach out to me at dlaney@westmonroe.com or find me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks, Malcolm.